The crack of a gunshot echoed through the pine forest, sending a flock of startled birds into the evening sky as Ruby Keller crashed through the underbrush, her heart pounding against her ribs like a hammer on an anvil. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath. The summer of 1875 in Colorado Territory, proving unforgiving to those on the run. The bounty on her head had drawn predators from every corner of the West, men who cared nothing for truth or justice, only the price they could collect for delivering her, dead or alive. I can hear her up ahead. A gruff voice called out behind her, followed by the sound of horses crashing through the forest. Don't lose her, boys. $500 to the man who catches her first. Ruby's skirts caught on a bramble, and she yanked them free with a desperate sob. The wanted poster with her likeness had been plastered across 3 territories, proclaiming her guilt in a crime she never committed. The murder of her employer, a wealthy rancher who had been found with his throat slit, his safe emptied. She'd been framed by the real killer, who'd left her handkerchief soaked in blood at the scene, a handkerchief stolen from her quarters days before. The bounty hunters were gaining. Ruby could hear their horses snorting, branches snapping under heavy hooves. 3 men, maybe 4, all determined to claim the price on her head. Her foot caught on a root, sending her tumbling down a short embankment. Pain shot through her ankle as she scrambled back to her feet, limping now but refusing to surrender. The forest began to thin ahead, revealing rolling pastureland beyond. With no cover there, she'd be an easy target. Ruby veered north, following the tree line, praying for some miracle that would save her from the men behind her. There she is. Another shot rang out, splintering bark from a tree inches from her face. Panic surged through her veins as she darted between 2 massive pines. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. If she could just make it to nightfall, perhaps darkness would be her ally. Then she saw a small cabin nestled among the trees, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A last desperate hope. Ruby changed course, racing toward it with the last of her strength. As she burst into the small clearing surrounding the cabin, the door swung open. A tall man stepped out, rifle in hand, alert to the commotion. He wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, dusty denims, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, sharp and clear as creek water, taking in her disheveled appearance and the terror etched across her face. "Please," she gasped, stumbling toward him. "They're going to kill me." Without hesitation, the man grasped her arm and pulled her inside the cabin. He moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to thinking quickly, to surviving in a land where hesitation meant death. "Under the bed," he commanded, his voice low and steady. "Now." Ruby dropped to her hands and knees, crawling beneath the simple wooden bed frame as the man quickly rearranged the quilt to hide her completely. She could see his boots as he moved around the small cabin, hear him gathering items and opening what sounded like a trunk. "Don't make a sound," he warned, "no matter what you hear." The thunder of approaching horses filled the clearing, followed by men's voices calling to each other. Ruby pressed a hand over her mouth, trying to quiet her ragged breathing as dust from the floorboards tickled her nose. The cabin door opened and the man stepped outside. She could just see through a gap in the quilt as he stood in the doorway, one hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Evening, gentlemen," he called out, his tone remarkably calm. "Something I can help you with?" "Looking for a woman," came a rough reply. "Fugitive, murderer, saw her running this way." "Ain't seen no women around here in weeks," the man replied. "Just me and the coyotes." There was a pause, the tension so thick Ruby could hardly breathe. "You mind if we take a look inside your place?" Another voice asked, less a question than a demand. Actually, I do mind, her protector answered, his posture shifting slightly. Cabin's a mess and I ain't had visitors in a while. This ain't a social call, the first man snapped. That woman's worth $500. Stand aside. Ruby's heart nearly stopped. They wouldn't be deterred so easily. Any moment now they would force their way in, find her, drag her away to a hanging she didn't deserve. I can't do that, the man at the door replied, his voice hardening. But I'll tell you what, she was here. Ruby's blood turned to ice. Was he betraying her already? Left about 10 minutes ago, he continued smoothly. Heading west toward that ridge, said something about meeting someone at Widow's Creek. You expect us to believe that? One of the bounty hunters scoffed. Step aside, cowboy, before we decide you're harboring a fugitive. Listen carefully, her defender said, his voice dropping dangerously low. I know who you're after. Ruby Keller, wanted for the murder of Maxwell Thornton up in Cannon City. Poster says dead or alive, doesn't it? That's right. Well, here's what's going to happen. You boys are going to turn around and ride west like I told you, because if you don't... He paused, and Ruby could imagine the cold stare he was giving them. They'll find me instead, and I promise you, I'm a whole lot more trouble than some frightened woman. The silence that followed was broken only by the snorting of horses and the distant call of a whippoorwill. Wait a minute, one of the men said slowly. I know you. You're Ryder Zachary, ain't you? The gunslinger from Wyoming Territory. Ryder Zachary. The name meant nothing to Ruby, but it clearly meant something to the bounty hunters. Their tone had changed, become wary. That's right, Ryder confirmed. And I'd hate to add your names to my reputation. Another long silence, followed by the creak of saddle leather as someone dismounted. No offense meant, Zachary, the leader said, his voice now respectful, even cautious. Just doing our job same as you might. None taken. But the woman isn't here, and I'd appreciate it if you'd continue your search elsewhere. What's your interest in this? Why would you help a murderer? I don't believe in hunting women, Ryder replied simply. And I don't believe everything I read on wanted posters. Ruby held her breath, waiting. Would they leave, or would they challenge this man, this Ryder Zachary, who'd chosen to stand between her and certain death? Mount up, boys, the leader finally ordered. We'll check Widow's Creek, but if we find out you're lying, Zachary, you won't be back, Ryder finished for him, the threat unmistakable in his calm voice. The sound of horses moving away gradually faded into the distance. Still, Ruby didn't move, afraid it might be a trick. Only when Ryder's boots appeared in her line of sight and he crouched down beside the bed did she release the breath she'd been holding. They're gone, he said, lifting the quilt to look at her. In the fading light streaming through the cabin's single window, she could see his face clearly, for the first time strong-jawed, with several days' worth of stubble, a small scar bisecting one eyebrow, and those remarkable eyes that seemed to see right through her. For now, at least. Ruby crawled out from her hiding place, wincing as she put weight on her injured ankle. You're hurt, he observed. It's nothing, she replied automatically, then swayed slightly as exhaustion and relief made her dizzy. Ryder caught her arm, steadying her. Sit, he commanded, guiding her to the cabin's only chair. He knelt before her, gently examining her ankle with capable hands. Sprained, not broken. You're lucky. Lucky, Ruby repeated with a hollow laugh. Is that what you call it when half the territory wants you dead for something you didn't do? He looked up at her, those eyes questioning. Did you kill Maxwell Thornton? No, she answered without hesitation. I was his housekeeper. Someone framed me. Ryder nodded once, as if her word was all the evidence he needed. He rose and moved to a shelf, retrieving a small jar. Why did you help me? Ruby asked. watching as he opened the jar, releasing the pungent smell of some herbal salve. "You don't know me. You could have just handed me over." "Could have," he agreed, kneeling again to apply the salve to her ankle. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands that clearly knew how to use weapons. But 5 against 1 didn't seem sporting. 5. "You and me against 4 bounty hunters," he explained, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. "Though I suppose they didn't know you'd be fighting back." Despite everything, Ruby found herself smiling. "I would have. I've been running for 3 weeks now. I'm not going to hang for a crime I didn't commit." Ryder wrapped a clean cloth around her ankle, tying it with practiced efficiency. "You won't hang at all if I have anything to say about it," he said quietly. "Why would you risk yourself for me? That man recognized you, called you a gunslinger." Ryder's expression darkened momentarily. "I've been called worse." He stood, moving to the small stove in the corner of the cabin. "You hungry? You look like you haven't eaten in days." Ruby's stomach rumbled in response, making him chuckle. "I'll take that as a yes," he said, stoking the fire and reaching for a cast iron pot. "Hope you like rabbit stew. It's about all I've got." As he prepared the meal, Ruby took the opportunity to study both him and the cabin. The space was small but neat, with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a chest for storage. A rifle hung over the door, and she noticed at least 2 more weapons within easy reach. Whoever Ryder Zachary was, he lived like a man who expected trouble. "Those men," she began hesitantly, "they seemed afraid of you." Ryder didn't look up from his cooking. "Good. Fear keeps people honest sometimes, are you? Dangerous." Now he did look at her, those clear eyes unreadable. "To some people, yes. But not to me. No, Miss Keller, not to you." He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and handed it to her along with a spoon. "Eat. Then get some rest. Those bounty hunters might be dumb enough to check Widow's Creek tonight, but they'll be back by morning when they realize I sent them on a wild goose chase." Ruby took a spoonful of the stew, the rich flavor exploding on her tongue. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that first bite. "Where will we go?" she asked between mouthfuls. You're not going to help me." Ryder sat at the small table across from her, his own bowl untouched as he watched her eat. "I don't recall offering to do more than hide you for the night." Ruby set down her spoon, suddenly cold despite the warm stew. "Of course. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed." She looked around the cabin, reality crashing back down. "I'll leave at first light. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Trouble's been knocking at my door long before you showed up," Ryder replied, finally starting to eat his own stew. "And I didn't say I wouldn't help you. Just that I hadn't offered. And are you offering?" He studied her for a long moment. "You really didn't kill Thornton?" "No, I found him. The killer had already gone." Ruby shuddered at the memory. "There was so much blood." "Who do you think did it?" "His business partner, Edgar Winthrop." They'd been arguing about money, about the mine they owned together. "The night before, I overheard Winthrop threatening him." She looked down at her hands. "No one believes me. Winthrop is respected in Cannon City. I'm just a housekeeper who needed the job." Ryder was silent for several moments, thinking. Then he nodded once decisively. "All right, Miss Keller, I'll help you, but not by running. That's no life for anyone, especially not a woman alone." Hope fluttered in Ruby's chest, fragile as a butterfly's wing. "What then? We clear your name." He said it simply, as if suggesting they go fishing. "We find evidence that Winthrop killed Thornton and we bring it to the law." Just like that. Ruby couldn't help the skepticism in her voice. "I've been trying to think of how to prove my innocence for weeks. You were alone. Now you're not." Ryder leaned forward, his gaze intent. "I know people in Cannon City, people who owe me favors, and I know how men like Winthrop think. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." A shadow passed across his face, something ancient and pained. Let's just say I know what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do. He stood abruptly, taking her empty bowl. Get some sleep. You can have the bed, I'll take the chair. But no arguments. You've been running for weeks. You need real rest. He moved to a trunk at the foot of the bed, pulling out a clean shirt. You can wear this tonight. It'll be more comfortable than sleeping in that dress. Ruby accepted the shirt, a simple cotton garment that would hang like a dress on her smaller frame. Thank you, Mr. Zachary. Ryder, he corrected, turning away to give her privacy. If we're going to clear your name together, might as well use my given name. Ruby changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar buttons. The shirt smelled of pine and wood smoke like Ryder himself. I'm decent, she said softly. He turned back, his expression softening slightly at the sight of her in his too large shirt. Get some sleep, Ruby. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to save your life. As she slipped beneath the quilts on his bed, exhaustion finally claiming her, Ruby's last conscious thought was that for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. Whatever dangers tomorrow might bring, tonight she wasn't alone, and that was enough. Ruby woke to the scent of coffee and the quiet sounds of movement. For a moment, disoriented by actual rest in an actual bed, she forgot where she was and who had saved her. Then the events of the previous day rushed back, and she sat up quickly, wincing as her muscles protested. Ryder stood by the small stove, his back to her as he poured coffee into 2 tin cups. He'd already dressed, and judging by the dampness of his hair, he'd bathed in the creek that Ruby could hear burbling nearby. Morning, he said without turning. How's the ankle? Ruby flexed her foot experimentally. Better, still sore, but I can walk. Good, we've got ground to cover. He turned, offering her a cup. It's not fancy, but it's hot. She accepted the coffee gratefully, taking a careful sip of the strong brew. What's the plan? First, you need proper clothes. Can't have you running around in my shirt. There was a hint of amusement in his eyes as he gestured to a bundle on the table. Found these in my trunk. They belong to my sister. Should fit well enough until we can get you something better. Ruby was touched by the thoughtfulness. You have a sister, Ryder said shortly, turning back to the stove. Breakfast's almost ready. Get dressed. She didn't press for details, recognizing the pain behind his curt response. Instead, she took the clothes, a simple skirt and blouse, worn but clean, and retreated behind a blanket he'd hung for privacy. As she dressed, Ruby considered her unlikely protector. Ryder Zachary was clearly a man with a past, someone who knew how to handle himself in dangerous situations. But he was also someone who kept a sister's clothes, who made breakfast for a stranger, who chose to help when he could have simply sent her on her way. Why is a gunslinger living alone in a cabin in the Colorado woods? She asked as she emerged, smoothing down the skirt that was indeed a reasonable fit. Ryder set a plate of beans and bacon before her. Who says I'm a gunslinger? Those bounty hunters seem to think so. He sat across from her, his own plate untouched. I've been a lot of things. Cowhand, scout for the Army, shotgun messenger for Wells Fargo. He shrugged. Earned a reputation along the way that wasn't always deserved, but sometimes proved useful. Like last night. Like last night, he agreed. Eat up. We're riding to Cannon City. Ruby nearly choked on her food. Cannon City. That's the last place I should go. The sheriff there wants to hang me. Sheriff Hollister. Ryder shook his head. He's a reasonable man, and he owes me. For what? I saved his life once during a bank robbery. 3 men with guns and him with a bullet in his leg. Ryder finally took a bite of his breakfast. Besides, we're not going to announce ourselves. We need information first. About Winthrop, about everything. The murder, Winthrop's finances, witnesses. Ryder's expression was determined. Every crime leaves evidence, we just need to find it. Ruby wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that her nightmare might actually end, but fear still gripped her heart. And if we can't, if we're caught, then I'll get you out of the territory, he promised. But first, we try this my way. After breakfast, Ryder packed supplies while Ruby washed the dishes in a bucket of water from the creek. They worked in companionable silence, each focused on the tasks at hand. It felt strangely domestic, Ruby thought, for two people who'd known each other less than a day. "You ride?" Ryder asked as they stepped outside where a handsome bay gelding was tethered. "Yes, though it's been a while," he nodded approvingly. "Good. We'll share captain here until we can get you your own mount." Ruby eyed the large horse nervously. "Are you sure he can carry us both?" "Captain's carried me through worse than a pretty woman," Ryder replied, then seemed to catch himself, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "I know what you meant," Ruby said, unable to keep from smiling. It was the first time she'd seen any crack in his stoic demeanor. "And thank you for the compliment, unintended as it was." Ryder cleared his throat, quickly checking Captain's saddle straps. "We should reach Cannon City by nightfall if we push hard. I know a place on the outskirts where we can stay without questions." "A friend?" "Something like that." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. Ruby was acutely aware of his solid presence at her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. It had been a long time since she'd been this close to a man, and never one quite like Ryder Zachary. They rode in silence for the first hour, the forest gradually giving way to rolling grassland. The summer sun beat down, but a gentle breeze made the heat bearable. In another time, another life, it might have been pleasant, this journey through the Colorado wilderness with a handsome, enigmatic man. "How long have you lived in that cabin?" Ruby asked eventually, breaking the silence. "3 years, Ryder replied, his voice rumbling against her back. "After I left Wells Fargo, it seems lonely." "It's quiet," he corrected. "I've had enough noise and trouble to last several lifetimes." "Is that why those men recognized your name? Because of trouble?" Ryder was silent for so long that Ruby thought he might not answer. "I've killed men," he finally said, his voice low. "Never without cause, never from the back, but I've done it. It gives a man a certain reputation in these parts." "And is that why you live alone? Because of your reputation?" "Partly." His arms tightened almost imperceptibly around her as he guided Captain around a rocky outcropping. "Partly because most folks don't want a man with my history settling in their town. That seems unfair." "Life often is, Miss Keller. I imagine you know that better than most right now." She couldn't argue with that. Her entire world had been upended by a false accusation, her future stolen by a murderer who'd used her as a convenient scapegoat. "Tell me about Maxwell Thornton," Ryder said after another stretch of silence. "What kind of man was he?" Ruby considered the question. "Decent enough, as employers go. He paid fair wages, didn't make improper advances. He could be demanding, particular about how things were done, but never cruel." "And his relationship with Winthrop, strained, especially in the weeks before the murder. They'd been partners in the Silver Creek mine for years, but something changed. They argued constantly." Ruby frowned, remembering. The night before the murder, Winthrop came to the house late. They were in Thornton's study for hours, shouting. "I heard Winthrop say, 'You'll regret this, Max. No one cheats me.'" "Cheats," Ryder repeated thoughtfully. "So it was about money." "I think so. Thornton had been meeting with other investors. I think he was trying to buy Winthrop out or maybe bring in new partners. And Winthrop didn't like that. No, he was furious." Ryder fell silent again, and Ruby could almost feel him thinking, piecing together what she'd told him. "The mine," he finally said. "That's where we'll find our answers. The mine. But shouldn't we look for evidence at Thornton's house? That's where he was killed. The murder was about the mine. That's where the motive is." Ryder's voice was certain. "We need to understand what made it worth killing for." As the sun climbed higher, they stopped briefly by a creek to rest Captain and drink from the cool water. Ruby splashed some on her face, grateful for the relief from the heat. "How's your ankle?" Ryder asked, watching her carefully. "It's fine. Your salve helped." She hesitated, then asked, "Ryder, what happens if we can't prove Winthrop's guilt?" He crouched beside her at the creek's edge, his reflection rippling next to hers in the clear water. "Then I get you somewhere safe. Maybe up to Wyoming territory where I still have friends. Or west to California where no one knows either of us. You'd leave your home. For a stranger." His eyes met hers, serious and steady. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Ruby." Something in his gaze made her heart beat faster, and she looked away, suddenly flustered. "I suppose not. Besides," he continued, standing and offering her a hand up, "that cabin's just a place. I've left homes before. It's people that matter, not places." His words stayed with Ruby as they continued their journey. The rolling landscape gradually giving way to signs of civilization, fenced pastures, the occasional distant farmhouse, and finally, the rutted wagon road leading to Cannon City. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the town appeared on the horizon. Ruby felt fear rise in her throat at the sight of it. Somewhere in that collection of buildings, the real murderer walked free while she was hunted like an animal. "I can't go in there," she whispered, her body tensing. "Everyone knows my face from the wanted posters." "We're not going into town yet," Ryder assured her, guiding Captain off the main road onto a less traveled path. "There's a small homestead about a mile south. We'll stay there tonight, make our plans." "Who lives there?" "A woman named Margaret Holden. Widow. Husband was a friend of mine, died in a mining accident 2 years back. I check in on her when I can." They crested a small hill, and Ruby saw a neat little house with a barn behind it, smoke rising from the chimney. A vegetable garden stretched to one side and chickens pecked in the yard. "Will she help us?" Ruby asked uncertainly. "Margaret's no friend to the rich men of Cannon City. Her husband's death was caused by poor safety in Thornton's mine, though it was Winthrop who managed operations then." Ryder's voice hardened. "The company paid her a pittance in compensation. She'll help us." As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the setting sun. She was perhaps 40, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and a sturdy build that spoke of hard work. "Ryder Zachary," she called out, a smile spreading across her weathered face. "It's been months. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten your promise to James." Ryder dismounted, then reached up to help Ruby down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary before he turned to greet Margaret. "Never, Maggie. Just been keeping to myself as usual." He embraced the older woman briefly. "We need your help if you're willing to give it." Margaret's eyes shifted to Ruby, curiosity evident. "And who might this be?" "This is Ruby Keller," Ryder said, his hand moving to Ruby's lower back in a protective gesture. "She's in trouble. Trouble that leads straight to Edgar Winthrop." At the mention of Winthrop's name, Margaret's expression darkened. "Come inside, both of you. Sounds like we have much to discuss." The interior of Margaret's home was simple but comfortable, with handmade quilts and dried flowers bringing warmth to the modest space. She sat them at her kitchen table and placed a pot of stew over the fire before Ryder could even explain their situation. "Travelers need food," she said firmly. "Explanations can wait until you've eaten." As they ate Margaret's rabbit stew, far more flavorful than Ryder's, though Ruby would never tell him that Ryder explained Ruby's situation. He spoke clearly and concisely, outlining the murder, the evidence against her, and their suspicions about Winthrop. Margaret listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. When Ryder finished, she looked at Ruby with compassionate eyes. "You poor girl, running all this time with killers on your trail." She reached across the table to pat Ruby's hand. "Of course I'll help however I can." "We need information," Ryder said, "about Thornton and Winthrop's business dealings, about the mine." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "I might know something useful. After James died, I made it my business to learn everything I could about that mine and the men who owned it. Knowledge is its own kind of power, even for a widow with no standing." She rose and went to a small secretary desk in the corner, returning with a leather-bound notebook. James kept records notes about unsafe conditions, about conversations he overheard. I've added to it over the years, things I've learned from other miners' wives, from servants who work in the big houses. Ryder took the notebook reverently. "This could be exactly what we need, Maggie. Thank you." "There's more," she said, her voice lowering as if someone might overhear. 2 weeks before Thornton was killed, there was a big find at the Silver Creek mine. A new vein rich with silver. It wasn't announced publicly, the owners wanted to buy up surrounding claims first, but James's old friend Carter still works there. He told me. "A new vein would be worth a fortune," Ryder mused. "If Thornton was trying to force Winthrop out just as they made a major discovery. It would give Winthrop a powerful motive to eliminate his partner," Ruby finished, excitement building. "This could be the key to proving my innocence." "There's something else you should know," Margaret said, her expression troubled. "Winthrop's been making changes since Thornton's death. Brought in armed guards at the mine, restricted access. Word is he's working the men harder than ever, taking more risks with safety. He's extracting as much silver as possible, as quickly as possible," Ryder surmised. "A man in a hurry, perhaps afraid his crime might be discovered." "Or a man who knows the vein might not last," Margaret suggested. "Either way, he's become even more powerful in Cannon City since Thornton's death. The sheriff, the mayor, they all defer to him now." Ruby's brief hope dimmed. "So even with this information, we'll be fighting an uphill battle." "We need proof," Ryder agreed. "Something that places Winthrop at the scene of the murder, something that can't be explained away." They spent the next hour poring over James Holden's notebook, finding references to heated arguments between the partners, concerns about Winthrop's increasingly erratic behavior in the months before the murder. It painted a picture of a man becoming desperate, paranoid even, but it wasn't enough to prove he'd committed murder. "We need to get into Thornton's house," Ruby finally said. "The study where he was killed, there might be something there, something overlooked." "Impossible," Margaret said with a shake of her head. "After the murder, Winthrop had the house locked up tight. He claimed it was out of respect, but he posted guards. No one gets in or out." "There must be a way," Ruby insisted, frustration evident in her voice. "Otherwise, I'll never be free." Ryder had been quiet for several minutes, lost in thought. Now he looked up, determination in his eyes. "There is a way. Thornton's valet, Henderson. What happened to him after the murder?" "He still works for the estate," Margaret replied. "Maintains the house, though no one lives there now." "Henderson knows me," Ryder said. "I did some work for Thornton a few years back, security for a shipment of silver. We got along well." "You think he'll help us?" Ruby asked skeptically. "Won't he be loyal to Winthrop now?" Henderson never liked Winthrop, thought he was crude, unrefined. Ryder smiled slightly. "And Henderson was fond of you, Ruby, wasn't he? You worked in the same household." Ruby nodded slowly, remembering the older man's kindness. "He always treated me with respect, brought me tea when I worked late cleaning." "Then there's our way in," Ryder decided. "We approach Henderson, see if he'll let us into the house. And if he refuses," Margaret asked. Then we find another way, Ryder replied simply. But first, we try the direct approach. Night had fallen completely by the time they finished their planning. Margaret insisted they stay, offering Ruby her spare bedroom and Ryder the sofa in her small parlor. After the meager comforts of his cabin and weeks on the run before that, the soft bed felt like heaven to Ruby. Yet despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with thoughts of the next day's dangers, of Winthrop, and what they might find in Thornton's house. And beneath those worries, a new awareness that made her heart beat faster the way Ryder had looked at her across Margaret's kitchen table. The gentle pressure of his hand at her back, the unexpected tenderness in his voice when he promised to keep her safe. Ruby had never believed in instant connections, in the kind of whirlwind romances found in penny novels. But there was something about Ryder Zachary that called to her, something that felt both dangerous and safe at the same time. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Ruby." Ryder's voice came quietly through the wood. "Are you awake?" She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. "Yes, come in." The door opened, and Ryder stood framed in the moonlight from the hallway window. He'd removed his vest and boots, but was otherwise still dressed. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, remaining in the doorway. "Kept thinking about tomorrow, me too." He hesitated, then said, "I want you to understand the risks. If this goes wrong, if we're caught, it won't just be you in danger anymore. I'm aiding a fugitive. That makes me one too." "I know," Ruby said softly. "Why are you doing this, Ryder? The truth this time." He was silent for a long moment, his face half in shadow. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted for something you didn't do, to have no one believe you, to watch your life slip away because of someone else's lie." "What happened?" Ryder leaned against the doorframe, his eyes distant with memory. "I was 19. Working a cattle drive in Wyoming territory. There was a dispute with another outfit over water rights. Words led to threats, threats led to guns." He paused, his jaw tightening. "A man died. I didn't kill him, but my gun had been fired and I was the stranger, the outsider." "You were framed," Ruby said, understanding dawning, not deliberately, just convenient assumptions. "I ran because I knew a trial wouldn't be fair. Spent 3 years looking over my shoulder before evidence emerged that cleared my name." His eyes refocused on her. "By then, my reputation was set. The man who ran, the gunslinger." "I'm sorry," Ruby said, meaning it. "That's why you understand. Why you believed me when no one else would." "Partly," Ryder acknowledged. "But also because I looked in your eyes and saw truth there. I've known enough liars in my life to recognize honesty when I see it." The simple statement touched Ruby deeply. After weeks of being called a murderer, a thief, a liar, Ryder's faith in her felt like water in a desert. "Thank you," she whispered. He straightened, nodding once. "Get some sleep, Ruby. Tomorrow we fight for your freedom." As he turned to go, she called softly, "Ryder." He paused, looking back. "When this is over, if we succeed, what then?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. "One step at a time," he said gently. "First, we clear your name, then you'll be free to choose your own path." After he closed the door, Ruby lay back against the pillows, wondering about that path and whether it might lead to a certain cabin in the Colorado woods and the complicated, honorable man who lived there. Morning came all too quickly, bringing with it a sense of purpose and trepidation. Margaret prepared a hearty breakfast, her practicality a steadying influence as they finalized their plans. "I've sent word to Henderson through my neighbor's boy," she explained, serving coffee. "Asked him to meet you at the creek behind Thornton's property at noon." Said it concerned Ruby and was urgent. "Will he come?" Ruby asked anxiously. "He'll come," Margaret assured her. Henderson was devastated when you were accused. He never believed you killed Thornton. Ryder checked his pistol, ensuring it was clean and loaded before returning it to its holster. We should approach separately. I'll go first, make sure it's not a trap. Ruby, you follow 10 minutes later. And if it is a trap, Ruby couldn't help asking, then you'll hear gunfire and you'll turn around and come straight back here, Ryder said firmly. Margaret will get you out of the territory. Ruby shook her head vehemently. I won't leave you. You will if it means saving your life. His tone brooked no argument. I can take care of myself, Ruby. She wanted to protest further, but the determined set of his jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she simply nodded, praying it wouldn't come to that. They left Margaret's home separately as planned, Ryder riding captain while Ruby followed on foot, keeping to the cover of trees and brush. The walk to the meeting place took nearly an hour, her ankle aching despite the rest it had gotten. But the pain was nothing compared to the fear that knotted her stomach as she approached the small clearing by the creek where Ryder and Henderson were supposed to meet. She paused at the edge of the tree line, scanning the area. Ryder stood with his back to a large oak, apparently alone. He caught sight of her and nodded once, indicating it was safe to approach. As Ruby stepped into the clearing, another figure emerged from behind a boulder. Henderson, the elderly valet, looking exactly as she remembered him, from his neatly trimmed silver mustache to his impeccable posture. Miss Keller, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Thank the Lord you're alive. Henderson. Ruby rushed forward, embracing the old man briefly. I've missed you, and I you, my dear. These past weeks have been most distressing. He stepped back, examining her with concern. You look thin. Have you been eating properly? The question was so typical of Henderson's fatherly concern that Ruby nearly laughed despite the gravity of their situation. When I can. But that's not important now. We need your help. So Mr. Zachary explained. Henderson glanced at Ryder, who remained vigilant, eyes scanning their surroundings. You believe Mr. Winthrop killed the master? We do, Ruby confirmed. And we need to find evidence in the house. Is there any way you could get us inside? Henderson hesitated only briefly. Yes. Mr. Winthrop visits the mine daily, stays until evening. The guards he posted watch the front of the house, but I know a way in through the servants' entrance that remains unguarded. When? Ryder asked, joining the conversation. Today. Now, if you wish. Mr. Winthrop left for the mine an hour ago. He won't return until after dark. Ruby exchanged a glance with Ryder, who nodded his agreement. This was moving faster than they'd planned, but perhaps that was for the best. Every hour Ruby remained in Cannon City increased the danger of discovery. Lead the way, Ryder said, taking captain's reins. Henderson guided them through a series of back paths and alleyways, carefully avoiding the more populated areas of town. Ruby kept her head down, a borrowed shawl from Margaret covering her distinctive red hair. Still, her heart pounded with every passing stranger, every distant voice. Thornton's mansion stood on a hill overlooking Cannon City, a testament to the wealth that silver mining had brought to the area. As they approached from behind, Ruby could see two men stationed at the front gates, but the rear of the property appeared deserted. The kitchen entrance, Henderson murmured, leading them to a small door partially hidden by climbing roses. The cook and maids have the day off Mr. Winthrop's orders. We should have the house to ourselves. He produced a key from his waistcoat pocket and unlocked the door, ushering them quickly inside. The familiar smells of the kitchen herbs hanging to dry, the lingering aroma of baked bread brought a wave of nostalgia to Ruby. It seemed a lifetime ago that she had worked here, moving through these rooms with a sense of purpose and security. The study is unchanged since that night, Henderson said gravely, as they moved through the servants' hallway toward the main part of the house. Mr. Winthrop ordered it left exactly as it was, supposedly out of respect for the master. Though I suspect he didn't want anything disturbed that might implicate him. "Has he been in there himself?" Ryder asked, frequently, always alone, always with the door locked. Henderson's expression was troubled. "I've heard him in there late at night moving things about, muttering to himself." "Looking for something," Ryder surmised, "or hiding something." They reached the study door, a heavy oak panel carved with hunting scenes. Henderson produced another key. "I shouldn't have this," he admitted, "but I made a copy. Something told me it might be needed someday." The door swung open, revealing the room where Maxwell Thornton had met his violent end. Despite the weeks that had passed, Ruby could still see bloodstains on the expensive carpet, now brown and crusted. The heavy desk dominated the room, papers still scattered across its surface as if Thornton had just stepped away. "I'll stand watch in the hall," Henderson said quietly. "Be quick. We cannot risk discovery." As the door closed behind him, Ruby and Ryder exchanged a determined look. "What exactly are we looking for?" Ruby asked, moving carefully around the bloodstains. "Anything that connects Winthrop to the murder. Anything that shows he had more motive than just business disagreements." Ryder began methodically examining the desk, rifling through papers with careful hands. Ruby moved to the bookshelves that lined one wall, searching for anything out of place. Thornton kept a journal, she remembered suddenly. He wrote in it every night before bed. I would bring him brandy and he would be sitting right there making entries. Where did he keep it? In his desk, I think. The top drawer had a lock. Ryder examined the drawer in question, finding it indeed locked. "Do you know where the key might be?" Ruby thought back, trying to remember details from her time in the household. He wore a watch chain. There was a small key on it along with his pocket watch. I always assumed it was for the drawer. "And where is that watch now?" "I don't know. He was wearing it when I found him." After, Ryder knelt, examining the drawer more closely. No time to look for a key. He produced a slender metal tool from his boot and inserted it into the lock, working it with practiced precision. After a moment, there was a soft click. "Useful skill," Ruby commented, raising an eyebrow. "In my line of work, sometimes doors need opening," he replied with a faint smile, sliding the drawer open. Inside lay several items. A leather-bound journal as Ruby had remembered, a stack of correspondence tied with string, and a small velvet pouch. Ryder took the journal first, flipping through its pages until he reached the final entries. "His last entry was the night before he died," he said, scanning the neat handwriting. "Listen to this. W. made threats again today. Says he'll ruin me if I proceed with the Clayton deal. He doesn't realize I've discovered his embezzlement. Tomorrow I present him with evidence and an ultimatum: step down quietly or face prosecution." Embezzlement. Ruby leaned closer, reading over Ryder's shoulder. Winthrop was stealing from the company, apparently, and Thornton found proof. Ryder set the journal aside and picked up the stack of letters. These might tell us more. As he untied the string, Ruby's attention was drawn to the velvet pouch. She opened it carefully, tipping the contents onto the desk. A heavy gold pocket watch slid out, along with a small key. "Thornton's watch," she breathed. "But why would it be in the drawer? He always wore it." "Unless someone put it there after his death," Ryder said, looking up from the letters with sudden intensity. "Someone who took it from his body." Ruby turned the watch over in her hand. Something dark crusted the intricate engraving on the case. "Ryder, look, is this blood?" He examined it closely. "Yes, and there's something caught in the chain." Using his knife tip, he carefully extracted a small thread of fabric, deep blue in color. "Expensive material. Like a gentleman's suit." "Winthrop always wears blue suits," Ruby said, excitement building. "He's known for it, says it brings out his eyes. If Thornton's blood is on this watch and Winthrop's clothing fiber is caught in the chain, it places him at the scene, struggling with Thornton," Ruby finished. "He must have taken the watch during the murder, then hidden it here later when he realized it could incriminate him." Ryder was already scanning the letters, his expression growing more triumphant by the second. "And here's the proof of embezzlement. Bank statements, transfer records, all showing Winthrop siphoning funds from the mine to a private account in Denver." The study door opened suddenly, making both of them jump. Henderson slipped inside, his face pale with alarm. "You must leave immediately," he whispered urgently. "Mr. Winthrop has returned unexpectedly. His carriage just pulled up at the front." Ruby felt her blood run cold. "Is there another way out?" "The servant's stairs, quickly," Henderson said, gesturing for them to follow. "Bring what you've found. We have only moments." Ryder gathered the journal and the most damning letters, while Ruby carefully replaced the watch in its pouch and tucked it into her skirt pocket. They hurried after Henderson, who led them down a narrow back staircase, just as voices became audible in the main hall below. "Ensure the shipment is ready by morning," Winthrop's distinctive voice carried up to them. "We can't afford any delays." "Yes, sir," another man responded. "And the guards, double them. I don't like the rumors I've been hearing about that Keller woman still being in the territory." Ruby froze on the stairs, Ryder's hand immediately moving to her arm in silent support. "Wait here," Henderson whispered, descending ahead of them to ensure the kitchen was clear. From their position, they could still hear Winthrop's conversation. "If she's found, I want to be informed immediately. She's dangerous, desperate. The reward stands $500, dead or alive." "Yes, Mr. Winthrop." Footsteps approached the main staircase, sending a spike of panic through Ruby. If Winthrop came upstairs now, if he checked the study and found the desk drawer open, the game would be up. Henderson reappeared at the bottom of the service stairs, beckoning urgently. They descended as quietly as possible, Ruby wincing at every creak of the worn wood beneath their feet. But Winthrop's voice was now receding as he moved toward another part of the house. The kitchen was mercifully empty. Henderson led them to the rear door, opening it just enough to peer outside. "The grounds appear clear," he whispered, "but move quickly. Head for the trees at the edge of the property." "Come with us," Ruby urged, grasping the old valet's hand. "When Winthrop discovers the evidence is missing, he'll suspect you." Henderson shook his head. "My place is here. Besides, if I disappear, it will only confirm his suspicions. No, I'll claim ignorance, say I was tending the garden and saw nothing." "It's too dangerous," Ruby insisted. "I'm an old man, Miss Keller. I've lived my life. You're just beginning yours." He pressed something into her hand, a small leather case. "Take this. It's my savings. Not much, but enough to help you start somewhere new if things go badly." Ruby's eyes filled with tears at the selfless gesture. "I'll return it when my name is cleared," she promised, with interest. Henderson smiled sadly. "I hope that day comes soon, my dear. Now go, both of you. Quickly." Ryder took Ruby's arm, and together they slipped out the door into the bright afternoon sunlight. Staying low, they hurried across the open ground to the shelter of the trees, every second expecting shouts of alarm from the house behind them. But they reached the tree line without incident, ducking into the dense underbrush just as one of Winthrop's guards rounded the corner of the house on his patrol. For several breathless moments they remained motionless, watching as the man surveyed the grounds before continuing his circuit. "That was too close," Ruby whispered when the guard had gone, "but worth it." Ryder patted the journal now secured inside his vest. "We have what we need. Now we need to get it to Sheriff Hollister before Winthrop realizes it's missing." They made their way carefully through the woods, circling wide around the property until they reached the spot where Ryder had left Captain tethered. The horse nickered softly in greeting as they approached. "The sheriff's office is on the main street," Ruby said as Ryder helped her mount. "There's no way to approach it without being seen." "We're not going to the sheriff's office," Ryder replied, swinging up behind her. "Too public, too many eyes. We'll send word asking Hollister to meet us somewhere private." "Margaret's." "No, I won't risk bringing danger to her door." Ryder guided Captain deeper into the trees, away from town. "There's an abandoned mining cabin about 2 miles from here. We'll wait there, send a message to Hollister through one of Margaret's trusted neighbors." As they rode, Ruby became increasingly aware of the precious evidence they carried. If they were caught now, if the journal and watch were discovered in their possession, they would have no chance to explain. They would be shot as thieves and fugitives, the truth dying with them. "You think Henderson will be safe?" she asked, unable to stop worrying about the kind old man who had risked so much to help them. For now, Winthrop can't act against him without raising suspicions. Ryder's arm tightened briefly around her waist. "Once we present our evidence, Henderson will be protected. All of this will be over." Ruby wanted to believe him, wanted to imagine a future where she wasn't running, wasn't afraid. A future where perhaps she and this complicated, honorable man riding with her might have a chance to discover what lay between them, beyond danger and necessity. The abandoned cabin was little more than a shack, its roof partially collapsed and its single window broken. But it offered shelter and concealment, tucked away in a small ravine that couldn't be seen from the main trail. "It's not much," Ryder said as he helped Ruby dismount, "but it will serve for a few hours." Inside, dust covered every surface and spiderwebs hung from the corners. A rusted stove stood in one corner, and a rickety table with a single chair occupied the center of the room. Ryder immediately set about clearing space, while Ruby used her shawl to wipe dust from the table. "We should examine everything more carefully," she suggested, pulling the watch from her pocket. "Make sure we understand exactly what we have before the sheriff arrives." Ryder nodded, producing the journal and letters. They spread their evidence across the table, piecing together the story of betrayal and murder that had led to Ruby becoming a fugitive. The journal entries painted a clear picture. Thornton had discovered Winthrop embezzling funds from their mining operation, siphoning profits into his own accounts instead of reinvesting in safety measures and proper equipment. When confronted, Winthrop had threatened Thornton, who had then gathered evidence and planned to force his partner out of the business. "The night of the murder," Ruby said slowly, "Thornton asked me to bring Brandy to the study later than usual. He said he was expecting someone important." "Winthrop," Ryder confirmed. "He came to kill Thornton before he could expose the embezzlement." "But why frame me? Why not just make it look like a robbery?" Ryder considered this. "Opportunity, perhaps. Your handkerchief was convenient." And a servant makes an easy scapegoat, few connections, little power to defend herself. Ruby examined the pocket watch again, turning it over in her hands. Something about it bothered her, something beyond the blood and the blue thread caught in its chain. "Wait," she said suddenly. "Look at the inscription inside the case." She opened the heavy gold cover to reveal an elegant engraving. "To Maxwell, my partner and friend, may our fortune continue to grow together. E.W. Edgar Winthrop," Ryder read over her shoulder. "He gave Thornton this watch." "Which means he would have recognized it immediately," Ruby said, excitement growing. "He couldn't leave it on the body because anyone who knew their relationship would wonder why Thornton wasn't wearing Winthrop's gift. So he took it, intending to dispose of it elsewhere," Ryder continued her thought. "But when he returned to the scene later after the investigation began, He hid it in the desk instead, not realizing it carried evidence of his guilt, Ruby finished. The blood, the fiber from his suit, he didn't see them in the dark. Ryder smiled at her, genuine admiration in his eyes. You would have made a fine detective, Ruby Keller. She felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. Just observant. When you clean houses for a living, you notice details. A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued organizing their evidence. Outside, the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains, casting long shadows through the broken window. "What will you do?" Ryder asked suddenly. "When this is over, when your name is cleared?" "Will you return to housekeeping?" Ruby considered the question. "I don't know. I can't imagine going back to Cannon City with all these memories." She looked up at him. "What about you? Will you return to your cabin in the woods?" Something unspoken passed between them, a current of possibility that had been building since that first night when he had hidden her beneath his bed. "That depends," he said softly. "On what?" "On whether I have reason to stay or reason to go elsewhere." Ruby's heart beat faster at his implication. "And what sort of reason might persuade you one way or the other?" Before Ryder could answer, the distinct sound of approaching horses reached them. He was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his pistol as he crossed to the window. "Two riders," he reported, his posture tense. "Coming slow, careful." "The sheriff?" Ruby asked hopefully. "Can't tell yet." Ryder positioned himself by the door, gun drawn. "Stay back, out of sight." Ruby gathered their evidence quickly, tucking it all into her skirt pocket as she moved to the corner of the cabin furthest from the door. Her heart hammered in her chest as the horses drew nearer, stopping just outside. "Hello, the cabin," a man's voice called. "Zachary, you in there?" Ryder relaxed visibly, though he didn't holster his weapon. "Hollister, that you?" "It's me. Got your message from the Wilson boy, said it was urgent." "Who's with you?" Ryder demanded, still cautious. "Deputy Michaels. No one else knows we're here." Ryder glanced at Ruby, who nodded nervously. He opened the door slowly, keeping his body positioned to shield her. Sheriff James Hollister was a barrel-chested man in his 50s, with a graying mustache and deep lines etched around his eyes. He stepped into the cabin, removing his hat, his deputy a younger man with a nervous expression following behind. Hollister's eyes widened when he caught sight of Ruby. "Miss Keller, I'll be damned." "Sheriff," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The sheriff looked between her and Ryder, his expression complicated. "Got a lot of men looking for this woman, Zachary. Rewards up to $500 now." "She didn't kill Thornton," Ryder said firmly. "So your message said." Hollister sighed heavily. "You also claim to have proof." Ruby stepped forward, drawing the evidence from her pocket. "We do, Sheriff. More than enough to show who really murdered Maxwell Thornton and why." For the next 20 minutes, they laid out their case, showing Hollister the journal entries, the letters documenting Winthrop's embezzlement, and finally, the damning evidence of the pocket watch with its incriminating blood and fiber. When they finished, the sheriff was silent for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "Edgar Winthrop is the most powerful man in Cannon City," he finally said. "Accusing him of murder isn't something I can do lightly." "The evidence speaks for itself," Ryder insisted. "Evidence that you obtained by breaking into Thornton's house," Hollister pointed out. "A good lawyer would have that thrown out before trial." Ruby felt despair rising in her throat. After everything they'd risked, would justice still be denied? "You know she's innocent, James," Ryder said quietly. "You know Winthrop is capable of this." Hollister rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I don't deny the evidence is compelling, and I've had my suspicions about Winthrop for years. But taking him down requires more than just suspicions and evidence that might be deemed inadmissible." "Then what do we need?" Ruby asked, frustration evident in her voice. "A confession," the sheriff replied simply. "Or a witness." Ryder and Ruby exchanged a look of dismay. "Winthrop isn't going to confess," Ruby said. "And there were no witnesses to the murder." "Actually," Hollister said slowly, "there might be one person who could corroborate parts of your story. Thornton's niece, Caroline. She was staying at the house the week of the murder, left town right after. Said she couldn't bear the memories." "Caroline was there?" Ruby asked, surprised. "I knew she visited occasionally, but I didn't realize she was in the house that night." "Her room was in the east wing, far from the study," Hollister explained. "But she might have heard something, seen something without realizing its significance at the time." "Where is she now?" Ryder asked. "Denver, last I heard, staying with relatives." Ruby's mind raced with this new information. If we could speak with her, convince her to come forward. "It might give us the additional evidence we need," Hollister agreed. "But you can't go to Denver, Miss Keller. You'd be recognized, arrested before you got within 10 miles of Caroline." "I'll go," Ryder said immediately. "I can travel faster alone, draw less attention." The thought of Ryder leaving, of being separated from him even temporarily, sent a pang through Ruby's heart. But she knew he was right. This might be their only chance to truly clear her name. "Where will I stay while you're gone?" she asked. "I can't go back to Margaret's. That would be the first place they'd look if they realize the evidence is missing." Hollister considered this problem. "There's a line shack about 15 miles north of here, used by the Circle D ranch during Roundup. It's empty this time of year. Remote enough that you should be safe for a few days." "I know it," Ryder nodded. "Ruby will need supplies, food, water." "I'll see to it," the sheriff assured him. "And I'll keep an eye on Winthrop, make sure he doesn't get suspicious. If he makes any moves to leave town or dispose of more evidence, I'll find a reason to detain him." As they finalized their plans, Ruby felt a mixture of hope and fear. They were so close to proving her innocence, to ending her nightmare. But the most dangerous part still lay ahead. "I should leave immediately," Ryder said as the sheriff and his deputy prepared to depart. "It's a 2-day ride to Denver and every hour counts." Hollister nodded in agreement. "Michaels will take Miss Keller to the line shack tonight after dark. I'll bring supplies tomorrow." "What about the evidence?" Ruby asked, reluctant to part with the proof they'd risked so much to obtain. "I'll take it," Hollister decided. "Lock it in my personal safe at home, not the office. Safer that way." As the sheriff and deputy mounted their horses, Hollister looked back at Ryder with a serious expression. "Be careful in Denver, Zachary. Winthrop has connections there too." "I always am," Ryder replied with a confidence Ruby envied. When they were alone again, an awkward silence fell between them. There was so much Ruby wanted to say, yet she found herself unable to form the words. "I'll be back as soon as I can," Ryder finally said, gathering his few belongings. 3 days, 4 at most." "I know," Ruby replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. "I'll be fine." He turned to her then, his expression softening. "Ruby, he paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Be careful. Trust no one but Hollister and Michaels." "I will." She stepped closer to him, drawn by something she couldn't name. "You be careful too. Winthrop is dangerous." "So am I," he reminded her with a small smile. Before she could lose her courage, Ruby rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. Ryder's hand came up to touch the spot where her lips had been, his eyes darkening with an emotion that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might pull her closer, might turn that innocent gesture into something more. Instead, he stepped back, his expression returning to its usual careful control. "Wait for Michaels after sundown. He'll take you to the line shack." With that, he was gone. the sound of Captain's hooves fading into the distance, leaving Ruby alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that whatever lay between her and Ryder Zachary had become far more complicated than gratitude or alliance. Deputy Michaels returned as promised after nightfall, bringing with him a gentle mare for Ruby to ride. They traveled in silence through the darkness, the young deputy clearly nervous about aiding a woman still technically wanted for murder. Ruby didn't attempt conversation, lost in her own thoughts and worries about Ryder's dangerous mission. The line shack was even more primitive than Ryder's cabin, a single room with a narrow cot, a small stove, and little else. But it was dry and secure, and as Michaels had promised, extremely remote. "Sheriff will bring supplies tomorrow," the deputy said awkwardly as he prepared to leave. "Lock the door behind me. Don't light more than a small fire. Smoke can be seen for miles up here." Ruby nodded her understanding. "Thank you, deputy. I know you're risking your position by helping me." Michaels shuffled his feet, not meeting her eyes. "Sheriff says you're innocent. That's good enough for me." After he left, Ruby barred the door as instructed and sat on the edge of the cot, the silence of the wilderness pressing in around her. For the first time in weeks, she was truly alone, no bounty hunters in pursuit, no immediate danger threatening, just solitude and the weight of waiting. She thought of Ryder, riding through the night toward Denver. Would he find Caroline? Would the woman be willing to help? And beyond those immediate concerns, what would happen when this was all over? Would Ryder return to his isolated cabin? Or would he consider a different future, one that might include her? Ruby had never been prone to romantic fantasies. Life, as a housekeeper, had taught her practicality, the value of security over passion. But something had awakened in her during these dangerous days with Ryder Zachary, a yearning for more than mere survival, a desire for connection that went beyond necessity. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Ruby eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of blood-stained watches and a pair of clear eyes that saw truth where others saw only guilt. The next 3 days passed with excruciating slowness. Sheriff Hollister brought supplies as promised: food, water, a change of clothing, even a few books to help pass the time. He also brought news. Winthrop had discovered the missing evidence and was in a rage, but had not yet connected Henderson to the theft. "The old man's playing his part well," Hollister reported. "Acting completely confused about the whole thing. Winthrop's suspicious, but he has no proof." "And has there been any word from Ryder?" Ruby asked, trying to keep the anxiety from her voice. "Not yet, but Denver's a big city. It might take time to locate the Thornton girl." By the 3rd day of Ryder's absence, Ruby's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. She paced the small confines of the line shack, alternately imagining the worst and hoping for the best. What if Winthrop's connections in Denver had recognized Ryder? What if Caroline refused to help? What if Ryder had decided the risk was too great and had simply continued on, leaving Colorado territory altogether? That last fear, though irrational, plagued her the most. She had come to depend on Ryder not just for protection, but for his unwavering belief in her innocence, for the way he looked at her as if she mattered. As evening approached on the 4th day, Ruby sat by the small window, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Hollister had promised to return today with news, but as darkness fell, she began to fear that something had gone wrong. The sound of approaching horses brought her to her feet, heart pounding. She peered cautiously through the window, relief flooding through her as she recognized Captain's distinctive gait. Ryder had returned, but as the riders drew closer, Ruby's relief turned to confusion. There were 3 horses, not 2. Ryder and Hollister were accompanied by a 3rd rider, a woman, her posture elegant even after what must have been a long journey. Ruby unbarred the door, stepping onto the small porch as they dismounted. Ryder looked exhausted, dust from the trail covering his clothing, dark circles beneath his eyes suggesting he had ridden with minimal rest. But when he saw her, his face transformed, a rare smile breaking through his fatigue. "Ruby," he said simply, the single word carrying a weight of meaning that made her heart skip. "You found her," Ruby replied, her eyes moving to the woman who was now removing her riding gloves. Caroline Thornton was perhaps 25, with the confident bearing of wealth and education. Her traveling clothes were expensive but practical, and her expression as she regarded Ruby was curious rather than accusatory. "Miss Thornton agreed to hear our case," Ryder explained, helping the young woman dismount. "She has information that may help us." "Please, call me Caroline," the newcomer said, extending her hand to Ruby. "Mr. Zachary has told me much about you, Miss Keller. I believe we have a great deal to discuss." Inside the cramped line shack, they gathered around the small table, Caroline removing her hat and shaking out her dark hair as Hollister lit a lantern. "I must admit, I was skeptical when Mr. Zachary first approached me," Caroline began. "The evidence against you seemed compelling. My uncle murdered, his safe emptied, your handkerchief at the scene." "I was framed," Ruby said quietly. So Mr. Zachary explained. And after hearing his account, examining the evidence he described, I began to remember things from that night, things that didn't make sense at the time, but now seemed significant. Hope surged through Ruby. "What things?" Caroline's elegant fingers traced patterns on the rough wooden table as she gathered her thoughts. "I was staying in the East Wing, as Sheriff Hollister mentioned. I'd come to visit Uncle Maxwell, to discuss my inheritance actually. He'd hinted that he was considering changes to his will." She paused, her expression troubled. "The night of the murder, I retired early with a headache, but I was wakened sometime after midnight by angry voices from the direction of the study. I recognized my uncle, of course, and the other man was Edgar Winthrop. They were arguing violently." "Did you hear what they were saying?" Ryder asked. "Fragments only. Something about money, about betrayal. Winthrop shouting, 'You'll regret this, Max.' It frightened me, but I knew my uncle and his partner often had heated discussions about business. I took a headache powder and went back to sleep." Caroline's voice faltered. "If I had gone to investigate, you might have been killed too," Ruby said gently. Caroline nodded, composing herself. "The next significant thing I remember is being awakened again, this time by a commotion in the house. Servants rushing about, someone crying. I came downstairs to find you, Miss Keller, being questioned by the sheriff, and my uncle dead in his study." "Did you notice anything unusual about Winthrop that morning?" Hollister asked, leaning forward intently. "Yes, though I didn't realize its importance until Mr. Zachary explained your theory. Edgar was wearing a different suit than he had been the night before, when I saw him arguing with Uncle Maxwell. I remember because it was unusual. Edgar always wore blue. It was something of a trademark. But that morning he wore gray. He changed clothes," Ryder said significantly. "Probably because his blue suit was stained with Thornton's blood." "There's more," Caroline continued. "After the funeral, when I was preparing to leave for Denver, I overheard Edgar in Uncle's study. The door was ajar, and he was talking to himself, searching through the desk drawers frantically. He kept saying, 'Where is it? It must be here.' I assumed he was looking for business papers, but now—" "He was looking for the watch," Ruby finished. "He must have hidden it there the night of the murder, then couldn't remember which drawer." "I'm willing to testify to what I heard and saw," Caroline said firmly. "I loved my uncle. If Edgar Winthrop killed him, I want justice done." Sheriff Hollister stood, his decision made. That's enough for me to make an arrest. With Miss Thornton's testimony, the journal entries, and the physical evidence of the watch, we have a solid case against Winthrop. When? Ryder asked. Tomorrow morning. I'll swear out a warrant tonight, gather a few deputies I trust. We'll take him at his office, less chance of resistance there than at his home. Hollister looked at Ruby. You should remain here until it's done. Once Winthrop's in custody, we can bring you in safely. Take your formal statement. Ruby nodded her agreement, though the thought of more waiting was almost unbearable. I'll stay with Miss Keller, Ryder said, surprising everyone. Caroline can go with you, Sheriff. She'll be safer in town under official protection. Hollister considered this, then nodded. Makes sense. We'll move at first light. With any luck, by this time tomorrow, Edgar Winthrop will be behind bars and Miss Keller will be a free woman. As the sheriff and Caroline prepared to leave, Ruby found herself both relieved and nervous at the prospect of being alone with Ryder. There was so much unspoken between them, so many possibilities hanging in the balance. You should get some rest, she told him as the others rode away, the sound of their horses fading into the twilight. You look exhausted. I've gone longer without sleep, Ryder replied, though he did sink gratefully into one of the line shack's 2 chairs. Rode straight through from Denver, only stopped to meet Hollister and pick up Caroline. Why? Ruby asked, genuinely curious. Why push so hard? He looked up at her, his eyes revealing more than his words ever did. You know why. The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with meaning. Ruby felt a flush rise to her cheeks. I was worried about you, she admitted, moving to the stove to heat coffee, needing something to occupy her hands. When you didn't return by the 3rd day. Took longer to convince Caroline than I expected. She had doubts, needed to see the evidence Hollister secured. Ryder ran a hand through his dust-streaked hair. But once she understood, she was determined to help. She's a remarkable woman. Yes, she is, Ruby agreed, a tiny, irrational pang of jealousy flickering through her at his praise of Caroline. She pushed it aside, focusing on preparing the coffee. They sat in companionable silence as they drank, the small stove providing both warmth and light as darkness fully claimed the world outside. Ruby couldn't help studying Ryder's face in the golden glow, noting the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to hold shadows even in the light. What will you do? She finally asked, echoing his question from days before. When this is over, Ryder set his cup down slowly. That depends. You said that before, that depends. On what exactly? He met her gaze directly now, all pretense of casual conversation abandoned. On you, Ruby. On what you want. Her heart hammered against her ribs. What I want. When your name is cleared, you'll have choices again. You could go anywhere, do anything. He paused, and for the first time since she'd known him, Ryder Zachary looked uncertain. I thought perhaps you might consider staying in Colorado, specifically in a certain cabin in the woods that could use a woman's touch. Ruby couldn't believe what she was hearing. Are you asking me to? To live with you? I'm asking you to marry me, Ryder said quietly. If you want to. If you could see yourself building a life with a man like me. Emotion welled up in Ruby's throat, tears pricking at her eyes. A man like you. You mean a man who risked everything to help a stranger, who believed in my innocence when no one else would, who rode for days without rest to bring back the one person who could save me. She moved around the table to stand before him, reaching out to touch his face gently. Yes, Ryder Zachary, I could very definitely see myself building a life with a man like you. He caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his cheek, his eyes never leaving hers. I don't have much to offer. The cabin's small and I'm not a wealthy man. I don't need wealth, Ruby said softly. I've worked in the homes of wealthy men. I've seen that money doesn't bring happiness. Trust does. Honor does. Love does. At the word love, Ryder stood, drawing her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. Is that what this is, Ruby Keller? Love, after so short a time? She smiled up at him, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. I don't know what else to call it. This feeling that I've known you forever, that I'd follow you anywhere, that the thought of not being with you hurts more than the fear of hanging. Love, then, he murmured, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. I didn't expect to find it, hiding a fugitive under my bed. Life has a way of surprising us, Ruby replied, her eyes drifting closed as Ryder finally lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative as if he feared she might vanish. But when Ruby's arms wound around his neck, when she pressed closer with a small sound of need, something in Ryder broke free. His embrace tightened, his kiss deepening with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he promised, his voice rough with emotion. Tomorrow this will all be over and we can begin our life together. Ruby believed him. After weeks of terror and uncertainty, she allowed herself to hope, to plan, to dream of a future with this man who had risked everything to save her. They spent the night talking, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Ryder told her about his sister, Emma, who had died of fever 3 years earlier, leaving him truly alone in the world. Ruby spoke of her own family, parents long dead, a childhood spent in various households as a servant. We'll make our own family, Ryder promised as dawn broke, casting golden light through the lined shack's small window. A proper home, children someday, everything neither of us has had. Ruby's heart swelled at the vision he painted, simple, honest, and more precious than all the silver in Colorado territory. As Ryder prepared to leave, he would join Hollister for Winthrop's arrest. Ensure everything went as planned. Ruby caught his hand. Be careful, she urged. Winthrop is desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. I know. He kissed her once more, a promise sealed with touch. Lock the door behind me. I'll return for you as soon as it's safe. Ruby watched from the window as Ryder rode away, her heart both full and anxious. They were so close to their happy ending. Just a few more hours and her nightmare would be over. The morning stretched endlessly, each minute feeling like an hour as Ruby paced the confines of the lined shack. By noon, she had reorganized the meager supplies 3 times, swept the floor with a makeshift broom, and read the same page of one of Hollister's books at least 20 times without comprehending a word. They should have returned by now. Winthrop's office was less than an hour's ride from the lined shack. Even accounting for the time needed to make the arrest, process the charges, and secure the prisoner, Ryder should have come for her by now, unless something had gone wrong. The thought sent a chill through Ruby's body. What if Winthrop had been warned? What if he'd resisted arrest? What if Ryder was hurt, or worse? As afternoon shadows lengthened across the floor, Ruby made a decision. She couldn't wait any longer, couldn't bear the uncertainty. She would go to Cannon City herself, find out what had happened. The mare Deputy Michaels had provided was still tethered outside, grazing peacefully. Ruby changed into the fresh clothing Hollister had brought, gathered the few belongings she had, and mounted the horse with determination. She knew the risk she was taking. If Winthrop hadn't been arrested, if he was still free, she was riding directly into danger. But the alternative, continuing to wait, not knowing if Ryder was safe, was unbearable. Ruby rode cautiously, keeping to less traveled paths, her senses alert for any sign of pursuit or danger. As she approached the outskirts of Cannon City, she pulled her shawl over her head, hoping to conceal her distinctive red hair and avoid immediate recognition. The town seemed oddly quiet for mid-afternoon. Few people moved along the main street, and those who did hurried with purpose, their expressions tense. Something had happened, something significant enough to disrupt the normal rhythm of Cannon City. Ruby guided her mare toward the sheriff's office, keeping to side streets and alleyways. As she neared the center of town, she heard voices raised in anger, the unmistakable sound of a crowd gathering. Tethering her horse behind the general store, Ruby moved on foot toward the commotion, her heart pounding with dread. The crowd had gathered in front of the jail, perhaps 50 people shouting questions and demands. Sheriff Hollister stood on the steps, his hands raised for silence. Ruby kept to the edges of the gathering, her shawl pulled forward to shadow her face. She strained to hear the sheriff's words over the clamor of voices. "Regret to inform you that Edgar Winthrop is dead," Hollister was saying, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed crowd. "He resisted arrest, drew a weapon, and was shot in the ensuing struggle." Murmurs rippled through the gathered townsfolk, shock, disbelief, anger. Winthrop had been an important man in Cannon City, his death a significant event regardless of the circumstances. Before his death, Hollister continued, evidence was discovered proving that Winthrop, not Ruby Keller, was responsible for the murder of Maxwell Thornton 3 weeks ago. Now the murmurs grew louder, people turning to their neighbors in surprise. Miss Keller was framed by Winthrop to conceal his own guilt. She is innocent of all charges and the bounty on her has been officially withdrawn. Relief flooded through Ruby at these words. It was over. She was cleared free. But where was Ryder? Why wasn't he with the sheriff? As if in answer to her unspoken question, the jail door opened and a figure emerged. Ryder, his left arm bound in a bloody bandage, his face grim but determined. "Winthrop didn't go quietly," he said, his voice pitched to carry to the crowd. "He had armed men waiting at his office." There was a gunfight. Sheriff Hollister's deputy, young Michaels, was killed, along with 2 of Winthrop's men. A woman in the crowd cried out, Michael's mother or wife perhaps, receiving the terrible news in this public manner. Ruby felt a pang of sorrow for the young deputy who had risked his position to help her. "Winthrop himself was wounded but escaped," Ryder continued. "We tracked him to his home, where he made his final stand. He admitted to Thornton's murder before he died, with multiple witnesses present." The crowd began to disperse, some heading for the saloon to discuss these dramatic events, others returning to their homes and businesses to spread the news. Ruby remained where she was, her eyes fixed on Ryder, waiting until it was safe to approach. When most of the townsfolk had gone, she finally stepped forward, dropping her shawl to reveal her face. "Ryder," she called softly. He turned at the sound of her voice, his expression transforming from weariness to joy. In 3 long strides he reached her, pulling her into a one-armed embrace that spoke of relief and love and the end of a long nightmare. "You're supposed to be at the line shack," he murmured against her hair. "You were supposed to return hours ago," she countered, drawing back to examine his wounded arm with concern. "How bad is it?" "Bullet grazed me. Looks worse than it is." His eyes searched her face. "It's over, Ruby. Really over." "Winthrop confessed everything before he died, the embezzlement, the murder, framing you. Caroline and Henderson both testified to what they knew. Your name is completely cleared." Tears of relief filled Ruby's eyes. "And Michaels, the deputy," Ryder's expression sobered. "He died protecting Caroline when Winthrop's men opened fire. She's safe, shaken, but unharmed." Ruby's heart ached for the young deputy who had helped her, for his family who would mourn him. Even in victory there was loss. "Come," Ryder said gently, sensing her mixed emotions. "There's someone who wants to see you." He led her into the jail, past empty cells to the sheriff's private office. There, sitting by the desk with a cup of tea in her trembling hands, was Caroline Thornton. When she saw Ruby, she set the cup down and rose, crossing the room to embrace her. "Miss Keller, Ruby, I'm so sorry for everything you've endured," she said sincerely. "If I had spoken up sooner, if I had realized what Edgar had done." "You couldn't have known," Ruby assured her. "What matters is that you came forward when it counted." Caroline smiled sadly. "Uncle Maxwell was always fond of you. He spoke highly of your work, your character. He would be pleased to know the truth has come to light." Sheriff Hollister entered then, looking exhausted but satisfied. "Miss Keller, good to see you, though I wish you'd waited at the line shack as instructed." "I was worried," Ruby admitted, "when no one came. We had our hands full," Hollister acknowledged. "But it's done now. Winthrop's dead, his confession witnessed and recorded. You're free to go wherever you please, do whatever you wish." Ruby looked at Ryder, who had moved to stand beside her, his good arm encircling her waist. "I know exactly where I'm going," she said softly. "And where might that be?" Caroline asked, noticing the exchange of glances between Ruby and Ryder. "Home," Ruby replied simply. "To a cabin in the woods that could use a woman's touch." Understanding dawned in Caroline's eyes, and she smiled warmly. "I wish you both every happiness. You've certainly earned it." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Ruby gave her formal statement, detailing the events of the night Thornton was murdered and her subsequent flight from false justice. The story of Winthrop's crimes and death spread through Colorado territory like wildfire, reaching even the most remote settlements. The bounty hunters who had pursued Ruby so relentlessly now slunk away in embarrassment, their prey transformed overnight from fugitive to victim in the public's eye. Some offered awkward apologies when they encountered her in town, most simply avoided her altogether. Henderson, the loyal valet who had risked so much to help them, was rewarded for his service by Caroline, who insisted he come to live with her in Denver as her household manager. The old man accepted with tears in his eyes, grateful to leave behind the house where his master had died so violently. Margaret Holden opened her home to Ruby and Ryder during these busy days, providing them with comfort and privacy as they dealt with the aftermath of Winthrop's confession and death. "I can't thank you enough, Maggie," Ryder told her the night before they planned to leave Cannon City for good. "Your help made all the difference. James would have done the same," she replied, patting his hand affectionately. "He always said you were the most honest man he'd ever known, despite that reputation you carry." Ruby, sitting beside Ryder at Margaret's kitchen table, squeezed his hand. "The reputation isn't the man," she said softly. "No, it isn't," Margaret agreed with a knowing smile. "Though I imagine it will follow you both for some time yet. The Gunslinger and the Fugitive sounds like a dime novel, doesn't it?" Ryder grimaced at the description, but Ruby laughed. "Let them talk. We know the truth." On their final night in Cannon City, before returning to Ryder's their cabin, they attended a small, private ceremony in the town's modest church. With Sheriff Hollister, Margaret, and Caroline as their only witnesses, Ruby Keller and Ryder Zachary were married by the local preacher, their vows simple but heartfelt. "Not exactly the wedding most girls dream of," Ryder murmured as they signed the marriage certificate afterward, his arm still in a sling but healing well. "It's perfect," Ruby assured him, her heart too full for elaborate ceremonies or grand celebrations. All that mattered was that they were together, free to begin their life without the shadow of false accusations or bounty hunters. Caroline approached them as they prepared to leave, a document in her hand. "A wedding gift," she said, passing it to Ruby. "Uncle Maxwell would have wanted you to have it." Ruby unfolded the paper, her eyes widening as she read. "Caroline, this is. We can't accept this." "What is it?" Ryder asked, peering over her shoulder. "Deed to a parcel of land," Caroline explained. "Part of my inheritance from Uncle Maxwell. 100 acres north of here with a small stream running through it. Good grazing land, I'm told." "It's too much," Ruby protested. "It's justice," Caroline replied firmly. "You lost weeks of your life running from a crime you didn't commit. My uncle's partner tried to hang you for his crime. This is the least I can do to make amends." Ryder studied the young woman thoughtfully. "Your uncle would be proud of the woman you've become, Miss Thornton." Caroline blushed slightly at the compliment. "I hope so. I'm returning to Denver tomorrow, but I'll visit Cannon City occasionally to check on the mine. Perhaps you'll allow me to call on you both when I do." "We'd be honored," Ruby assured her, embracing the woman who had helped restore her freedom and good name. As they rode away from Cannon City the next morning, Ruby couldn't help looking back at the town that had been the setting for so much terror and, ultimately, triumph in her life. She would never forget the fear of being hunted, the desperation of knowing a price was on her head for a crime she hadn't committed. But she would also never forget the man who had hidden her beneath his bed and said, "They'll find me instead." The man who had believed in her innocence, who had risked everything to help her, who now rode beside her as her husband. "Having second thoughts?" Ryder asked, noticing her backward glance. "No," Ruby replied truthfully. "Just thinking about how quickly life can change. 3 weeks ago I was running for my life, certain I'd be caught and hanged. Now I'm free, married, and apparently a landowner." Ryder's laugh was warm and genuine, a sound Ruby was coming to treasure for its rarity. "Life has a way of surprising us," he said, echoing her words from the lined shack. They reached Ryder's their cabin by mid-afternoon. It looked exactly as Ruby remembered it from that first desperate night, small, sturdy, isolated. But now, instead of representing temporary sanctuary, it symbolized home, future, possibility. "It's not much," Ryder said as he helped her dismount, repeating his words from their first meeting. "But it's ours." Ruby looked around at the small clearing, the sturdy cabin, the endless forest beyond. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it, "though I might add a garden come spring. And perhaps some curtains for that window." "Whatever you want," Ryder promised, pulling her into his arms. "This is your home now, Ruby Zachary, for as long as you want it to be." "Forever then," she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him, her heart full of love and gratitude and the sweet, heady freedom of a future reclaimed from the jaws of unjust fate. 1 year later, Ruby stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching as Ryder showed their 3-month-old son the proper way to hold a fishing pole. The baby, far too young to understand, nevertheless gurgled happily in his father's arms, tiny hands reaching for the colorful lure. "He'll be catching his own dinner before he can walk," Ryder declared proudly, carefully keeping the hooks away from curious fingers. "I certainly hope not," Ruby laughed, moving to join them. "I'd like him to master speaking and walking before we set him loose with fishing tackle." James Maxwell Zachary, named for both Ryder's lost friend and the man whose murder had inadvertently brought his parents together, had his mother's red hair and his father's clear, thoughtful eyes. Already he showed signs of a strong will and curious nature that both delighted and exhausted his adoring parents. "Letter came while you were teaching our son dubious outdoor skills," Ruby said, holding up an envelope bearing the distinctive handwriting of Caroline Thornton. "She's coming to visit next week on her way to inspect the mine." "Good," Ryder said, transferring little James to Ruby's arms. I've been meaning to talk to her about investing in that new smelter project in Boulder. Could mean good returns for both of us." Ruby smiled at her husband's newfound interest in business and investment. With Caroline's wedding gift of land, they had built a modest but profitable small ranch, running cattle on the fertile grassland while maintaining the cabin in the woods as their primary home. Ryder's skills as a former scout, and his reputation as a man not to be crossed, meant their property remained secure despite the occasional troublemakers that frontier life inevitably attracted. As for Ruby, she had discovered talents beyond housekeeping. Her meticulous nature and keen eye for detail had proven valuable in keeping the ranch's books, while her cooking had become locally famous, particularly her apple pies, which she sold to the general store in Cannon City at a tidy profit. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, independent, and most importantly, happy. The trauma of those desperate weeks when Ruby had been hunted had faded, though neither of them would ever forget how they had found each other. "You ever miss it?" Ruby asked as they watched the sun begin its descent behind the mountains, James dozing contentedly in her arms. "Miss what?" Ryder asked, his arm around her shoulders. "The excitement, the danger, being the famous gunslinger Ryder Zachary, striking fear into the hearts of bounty hunters." He laughed softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a single moment, though I'll admit, watching you face down that Miller last month when he tried to cheat us on grain prices brought back certain memories." Ruby smiled at the recollection. She had indeed developed a backbone of steel during her ordeal, a quality that occasionally surprised those who underestimated the petite, red-haired rancher's wife. "We've made a good life, haven't we?" she said, not really a question but a statement of gratitude. "The best," Ryder agreed, looking at their sleeping son with an expression of wonder that still hadn't faded. "And it's only the beginning." As twilight settled over their mountain home, Ruby reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here from housekeeper to fugitive to wife and mother. She had lost everything, only to gain more than she had ever dreamed possible. And it had all begun on a desperate evening when bounty hunters chased her through the woods, and a cowboy hit her and said, "They'll find me instead."